大家好，我是 Alex， 法国甜点师傅。And today we are here together to present you the very traditional brioche Nanterre. So what is a brioche Nanterre? First of all, we use this kind of cake mold to place our brioche inside. And the secret and the very story about that is like we used to shape 8 balls of brioche into this mold. And then the secret, of course, for a very good traditional brioche Nanterre is to lay rest during one night. For the small story, the brioche Nanterre Nanterre is a city, so nearby Paris, and it was originally designed in this city. And after, of course, because it was something very delicious and very buttery and very moisty inside, it travels all around the world. So here in Taiwan, we have the privilege and the chance to create these very special products for you. So for this brioche Nanterre recipe, I have in front of me some very important ingredients with very high quality. Which means first we have the flour T65. It's a French flour, but we can also use a bread flour. The specificity for this bread flour is it contains a certain amount of protein, which is around 11 to 12%. We have also just on the top of the flour, which is the dry yeast. Quite important to have the dry yeast to improve the brioche and to have a very nice volume. Also following by the eggs, whole eggs, and also some whole milk, which is very important to hydrate the brioche and to have later, we will see together, to have a nice window pane. Also to allow a good fermentation, we have just right here the sugar and also we have the salt. At the very end of the recipe, we are gonna add what is for me something very important is the butter. We use 82 AOP Isigny butter, which allow us to have a very nice flavor, and it will be very moist in the inside. So for this brioche Nanterre recipe, I'm gonna place first the flour into my mixing bowl. Also with the yeast. Following by the sugar and also the salt. And now we can add all our liquids, which is eggs and also the milk. Also, one of the secrets to have a very nice brioche at the end is the temperature. And to have the right temperature, which is 24 degrees in the end, is better to place all of your ingredients before in the fridge, to have them very cold at 3 degrees. I'm just gonna mix them in speed 1, so which is a very low speed, to make sure that all the ingredients will be combining together and to have later on a nice window pane. So for this step, it will take around 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, to allow the dough to become like a nice, to get a very nice elasticity. And also in the second part of the recipe, we are gonna add the Isigny AOP butter. Also very important, sometimes it's necessary to scrap your mixing bowl in order to have everything well combined together. Of course, for this one we use the machine, but if you also want to do it by hand, it is exactly the same thing. It will take just a little bit more time. Okay, so during the mixing process, we are gonna see that little by little you are gonna get like a nice window pane. So I was talking earlier about the window pane with the percentage of protein. So that is something very important, and this is why I highly recommend you to use a high protein flour, so which is around 11.5 to 12% protein. So because of this high content protein, we will be able to get a nice elasticity And after we get this nice elasticity, we will be able to add the butter. At least we can keep nicely the structure. So sometimes do not hesitate to stop again and scrap correctly, just to make sure that everything is well combined together. Also, during the process, it will be quite important to control the temperature. So the easiest way is to use a thermometer. So we can stop and to see if the dough is not too warm. If the dough is too warm, it will not be good for the fermentation. So this is why I recommend to place early on all the ingredients in the fridge. So I just check, and now we have something like 23 before to add the butter. So we can keep going a little bit until maximum 24, and we check if the elasticity is correct, then we will be able to add the butter. So we can check right now the texture. I'm just gonna take a little piece of brioche. So now it's not totally mixed yet because we still miss one step, but we can see that we have already something a bit elastic, even it's not totally smooth. But we can see we can already get like almost like a window pan, okay? Which is not totally perfect because it's still missing the ingredients. So now we are gonna keep mixing with the butter. I recommend to add the butter in 2 times and to have the butter cold. So this one you can keep in the fridge, and we are gonna add it right now. So let's say I add half of it, and I will keep let's say half of it in the fridge cold for the next part. So as soon as we add the butter, it will be sometimes necessary to stop the process and scrap on the side, just in order to have something well combined and to have only one piece of dough, and not the brioche on the base of the brioche on one side and the butter on the other side. So before we add the first part of the butter, now let's add the last part of the butter. At the same time, we can scrap on the side just to make sure we have only the brioche in one part and not to separate with the butter. And now we can keep mixing until we have a very smooth dough, and we will make sure that the temperature is around 24 degrees. 24 degrees is the best temperature if we want to have a nice fermentation, and if the temperature is too low, the fermentation will not start correctly, and if the temperature is too high, you will get something overproofed right away, so which is not the best condition. So this is why we try as much as possible to have a dough around 24 degrees. So during the mixing process, if at the end of the process you have a temperature lightly higher than 24, it's not super dramatic. Of course, it's better if you have 24, which is the requested temperature for most of the dough in bakery. However, if you have something higher, what I recommend to you is for the next step, which is the first fermentation. The first fermentation is we keep the dough here at room temperature to allow the dough to proof, and then to put in the refrigerator. But if the temperature is too high, let's say 26, even 27 sometimes, what is possible to do is just to reduce the fermentation process. So originally the fermentation is around 30 to 45 minutes. Let's say 30 minutes if it's not too warm and not too cold. Normally it's at room temperature, so which is around like 22 degrees for the environment. But if the situation is that your dough is too warm, then we are gonna reduce the fermentation process, so only 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will be able to put directly into the refrigerator. So now I just take a little piece of brioche and I want to check, even the process is not yet finished, but let's say by checking I can see how is the window pan already. It's already pretty nice, but I think the dough can be even a bit smoother. So I'm gonna keep mixing the dough until I have something perfectly smooth. So at this step, I just estimate that we need to keep mixing for 5 minutes in order to have something smoother. So now we take the brioche dough and we can see already a nice elasticity. And then the idea is to make a nice shape. And to have a smooth dough. To make sure it will not stick to your table, if you don't have a wood surface, you can use a little bit of flour, or you can also spray some oil, a natural oil, to make a nice shape. And then we can also check the temperature. I have to say that 24 is the best, but if it doesn't go over, let's say 25, it's okay. So now we are at 25, so which is slightly warmer, but not a big deal actually. We will plan to make like a fermentation of 30 minutes. So we have a final temperature of 25 degrees, so we just lay it proof at room temperature for the first fermentation for 30 minutes. So what I recommend is we're gonna place this dough into a container, which is, or we just use a cling film to protect the dough. So we take the dough and then we just use the cling film to protect it. And we are gonna keep like this for the first fermentation for 30 minutes at room temperature. If it's very warm at your place, we can reduce the first fermentation just to 15 minutes. So now we are gonna show you how to check for the dough after 30 minutes resting at room temperature. Previously, we have checked the window pan, so which was a very nice one. We can even check it right now. We can see it's very smooth and elastic. So now, after 30 minutes, we are gonna make like a small turn. So which is like we take the dough, and to give the dough some extra strength, we remove the gas from the first fermentation and we are gonna give like a turn in order to have something, of course, smooth, but also the dough will be like a nice and round shape, and the strength of the brioche will be increased. And when we try to make it as tight as possible, but of course to keep something very smooth. And when you touch it on the top of the brioche, you can feel like the brioche is quite strong. So then, at this step, we can put the brioche into a cling film, and we will keep the brioche overnight into the fridge. So your refrigerator should be at 3 degrees, and to allow to have a nice resting time for the brioche. So see you tomorrow. So now we are at the second day for our brioche Nanterre recipe. So I have the recipe, all the ingredients for the recipe are in there. And we are gonna, after one night in the fridge, we are gonna be able to make the final shaping and also the proofing and later on the baking process. So our brioche is nice and cold. I'm just gonna put a little bit of flour on it. It doesn't need to have that much flour, just to allow me to use with a rolling pin. I just want to make sure I have something, let's say, not too thick, and also at the same thickness everywhere. See, we have around around 2.5 cm. I mean, it doesn't matter how many cm, it's just to make sure that it's regular. And we can see the surface is very smooth, so which is a good point for us. Now for cake mold, a very traditional cake mold for the brioche Nanterre, we will need to shape 8 pieces of brioche, and each piece will be 30 grams. 30 grams times 8 pieces. So then what I recommend to you is to make, if possible, something like a square, which is easier later on to cut some nice square. So I got some small square like this, and I'm just gonna, so now it says 30 grams, so which is perfect. So we can take, because it's the same thickness, we can take the same example. If you have a bit more, you can just cut it. That you keep on the side. So which means if the next one is missing just a little bit, you can add into the middle. So we have 1, 2, 3. This one missing 2 grams, so I can add just a little piece on the top. Of course, if you have 1 or 2 grams extra for it, it's not a super big deal. So for our brioche cake mold, I suggest that you spray a very thin layer of oil inside. If you don't have this kind of oil at home, you can just use some butter or even just natural oil and to brush with into the mold. So now we are gonna go for the shaping of the brioche. So we can take one by one with just a very thin layer of flour. We just press down, and we are gonna put, I call it like a mini xiaolongbao in the beginning. You see, it looks, I mean, like an ugly xiaolongbao, but it is the same, a bit the same way for the beginning of the process. We put everything in the middle, then we put the nice and smooth part on the top, and then we will be able to make the shaping. At this step, I don't recommend to have a lot of flour on your table, otherwise it will be a bit slippery. So after, you see, we make a nice and very regular, and we are gonna get something very smooth. Of course, it's important to have a nice and very cold brioche. So if you think the temperature at your home is very warm, I recommend to you to place all those pieces of brioche into your fridge for several minutes. And then you can take one by one if you need. And if you think the surface is not perfectly smooth, you are able to put those pieces into the fridge, let it rest for a few minutes until it's a bit colder, and then you can take it again and shape it again one more time. But of course, I always used to say that the less you touch the dough, better will be the result, in order to have a very smooth surface and to make sure the dough will not become too warm. Okay, so now we have our 8 pieces for the brioche Nanterre. Now I will place them into the mold, one by one. That is the very traditional brioche that you can find in France for your breakfast. You know, I remember when I was a kid, I was asking my mom to prepare this kind of brioche for my breakfast, or also when we come back from school, it was very nice to have a nice slice of brioche with some jam, for example. So it reminds me of my childhood memory. So after 2.5 hours proofing at 27 degrees, this is the result we have. So we can see the volume is like a bit more than double, and it is now the time to bake it. So for this step, before to put in the oven, we are gonna brush some eggs. So I just beat some eggs, and I will just spread a thin layer on the top of the brioche. So we just brush some eggs just to have a very nice color on the top, and it will become very nice and golden brown on the surface. And then after we brush it, we are gonna have a little pearl of sugar, just a little bit. That reminds me of my childhood memory when I got back to school. I was really enjoying the crispiness also of the sugar and on the top of the brioche. Yeah, just like this. So for the proving part and also egg wash and sugar, it's now finished. Now let's talk about the baking process. Baking process is very important if you want to have a very moist brioche in the inside and lightly crispy with the sugar on the outside. So the best temperature is to set up your oven at around 160 degrees, and we're gonna bake it for about 20 to 25 minutes. Of course, you at home, you have probably a different oven than me, so I will recommend to you to check the color of your brioche. If the brioche is very still white, I encourage you to bake a bit more, and if you think the brioche is already dark enough, you can remove it. So this is what we're gonna see now. So here we are after 20 to 25 minutes, and this is the result. We have a nice golden brown color, and as soon as we remove it from the oven, it is necessary to unmold it, otherwise the brioche will be curved. So you just unmold it, and then you keep on a wire rack just to cool down. So here it is, my perfect breakfast, which is the Nanterre brioche. And I also want to share with you my tips for the tasting, which is quite important. This kind of brioche, if you don't want to eat right now, I suggest you to wrap it with a cling film and to store them in the freezer. And as soon as you want to taste the brioche, you just remove it and you just let it defrost, and it will remain moist in the inside. However, if you just want to eat it right now, of course, I suggest you to cool it down first, and you can keep this brioche, just use a cling film to wrap it, and you can easily keep it for 2 to 3 days. So, and after you just eat it at room temperature. We don't used to eat the brioche when it's cold. So just room temperature, it's perfect with a nice spreadable paste or a jam. Enjoy it!